If I had listened to every frightening prediction I heard after 60, I might have spent the last 40 years sitting still, swallowing fear with my breakfast, and waiting for old age to take the rest of my life away. I am 104 years old now, and there is one thing I wish I had understood much earlier. Growing older does not mean that every decision has already been made for you. I have watched people become afraid of food, afraid of movement, afraid of their own bodies, and sometimes so afraid of making the wrong choice that they stopped making choices at all. I know that fear because I lived with it myself. What surprised me was that the changes that helped me feel more capable were not mysterious. They were ordinary things I could repeat. I walked. I cooked simple meals. I ate more vegetables and whole fruits. I protected my sleep. I stayed close to people I loved. And perhaps most importantly, I learned to ask questions when someone told me I had to do something simply because I was getting older. I am not a doctor, sweetheart, and I would never want you to treat my story as medical instructions. I am simply Evelyn Harper, a woman who has lived a very long time and has had the privilege of watching many generations make choices, change their minds, recover from setbacks, and sometimes give up too early. I have also learned that a healthy life is not built by one perfect food. An apple will not solve everything. A bowl of vegetables will not solve everything. A walk will not solve everything. But when ordinary good choices begin supporting one another, life can feel different. Some studies suggest that regular movement, nutritious foods, adequate sleep, and strong social connections are associated with healthier aging. But my own lesson came from watching real people, including myself. I want to tell you how I reached that lesson, because the most important part was not what I removed from my life. It was what I stopped being afraid to do. And there was one conversation in Blackwood that finally made me realize that respecting a doctor and respecting my own voice were never supposed to be opposite choices. I first began thinking seriously about independence when I was in my late 60s, because that was when I started noticing how easily a person can confuse caution with surrender. I remember visiting a neighbor who had once walked everywhere, kept a garden, baked bread, and drove herself to see her sisters. After a few years of being told to take it easy, she began taking it easier and easier until she hardly left her chair. I am not saying rest caused her decline, because life and health are never that simple. But I remember wondering whether we sometimes protect older people so carefully that we forget to help them keep using what they still have. Around the same time, I met people from other countries who seemed to think about aging differently. I knew a woman whose family cooked beans, vegetables, grains, fruit, and soups most days, and who walked after meals simply because walking was part of the day. I met an Italian gentleman who could spend an hour talking over lunch as though the conversation itself were part of the meal. I knew a Japanese grandmother who tended plants long after she could no longer manage a large garden, because having something alive to care for gave shape to her mornings. None of these people claimed to have discovered a secret. That was what fascinated me. Their lives were repetitive in the best possible way. They ate recognizable food. They moved. They rested. They talked. They worked with their hands. They stayed useful. And I began asking myself a question that would follow me for decades. What if healthy aging is less about finding a miracle and more about refusing to abandon ordinary habits? I also began questioning medical advice more carefully. Not disrespectfully, carefully. If a doctor recommended a medication, I wanted to know what it was for, what benefits we were hoping for, what side effects I should watch for, whether it interacted with anything else I took, and when we would review the decision. That habit gave me confidence instead of rebellion. I never wanted to replace medical care with internet advice or kitchen remedies. I wanted to understand my care well enough to participate in it. And then, one winter, I received advice that frightened me so much that I almost stopped trusting my own judgment altogether. What happened next taught me why questions can sometimes be just as important as answers. The advice that shook me was not one outrageous statement, but a collection of small warnings that seemed to multiply every year. One person told me to avoid this food, another warned me about that food, and someone else suggested I should simply rest more because my body was no longer young. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Blackwood with a cup of tea in front of me, surrounded by notes, medication bottles, and papers, and thinking, Evelyn, do you understand any of this? The honest answer was no. That frightened me more than any diagnosis. So I began doing something very simple. I wrote down my questions before appointments. I asked what each medicine was supposed to do. I asked whether I needed to continue it indefinitely, or whether there was a planned review. I asked what symptoms should make me call. I asked whether a new supplement could interfere with something I was already taking. Sometimes the answer was reassuring. Sometimes it was complicated. Sometimes the doctor said, I need to check that. I learned to appreciate those words. A thoughtful, I need to check, is much safer than a confident guess. At the same time, I changed my kitchen without turning it into a laboratory. I began eating more vegetables because they were easy to recognize and easy to prepare. I ate leafy greens, carrots, tomatoes, cabbage, squash, beans, lentils, and whatever was in season. I kept fruit around because I wanted something sweet that still felt like food. Apples became an old friend. Berries became a weekend pleasure when I could get them. I stopped treating every carbohydrate as an enemy and started thinking about the whole meal instead of one ingredient. A bowl of lentil soup with vegetables felt very different from a plate of highly processed snacks, even though both could contain carbohydrates. I also learned that food advice has to fit the person. Someone with kidney disease, diabetes, swallowing difficulties, allergies, or other health conditions may need very different choices. That is why I am telling you what I observed, not handing you a prescription. My greatest surprise was that the more calmly I learned about my choices, the less afraid I became. Fear had been making my world smaller. Questions were opening it again. But I still had not understood the habit that would become the quiet foundation underneath everything else. For me, that foundation was movement, although I did not call it exercise for many years. I simply walked. Some mornings I walked around Blackwood before breakfast, watching the same houses wake up, hearing birds before the traffic became loud, and feeling my legs remember what they were meant to do. On other days, I walked after supper. When my knees complained, I shortened the walk. When the weather was poor, I moved around the house. I learned not to turn a missed day into a failed identity. One missed walk was just one missed walk. I could begin again tomorrow. I saw the same principle in food. I did not need a perfect diet. I needed meals I could actually live with. I made vegetable soups, roasted carrots and squash, cooked beans and lentils, added greens to eggs, ate plain yogurt when it suited me, and kept whole fruit within reach. Sometimes I ate fish. Sometimes I ate a meal that would make a nutrition magazine roll its eyes. I am 104, dear one, and I have eaten birthday cake. The difference was that cake was a celebration, not the foundation of my diet. I also noticed something interesting among older people who stayed active. They rarely talked about optimization. They talked about errands, grandchildren, gardens, church, neighbors, cooking, walking to the store, or meeting a friend for coffee. Their movement had a reason attached to it. That mattered to me. I did not walk because I wanted to become a younger version of myself. I walked because I wanted to remain the woman who could carry a basket, answer her own door, stand at the stove, and go see someone without needing to arrange an expedition. Sleep became part of the same picture. I began protecting a regular bedtime, keeping my evenings quieter, and paying attention to whether caffeine, worry, late meals, or television were making my nights worse. Researchers continue studying how sleep affects healthy aging, but I did not need a laboratory to tell me that a tired woman makes different choices from a rested one. And then there were relationships. I have seen loneliness change people. A person can eat beautifully and still become smaller inside if nobody calls. I began making regular phone calls, inviting people for soup, writing letters, and accepting help when I needed it. That last part took humility. Independence, I learned, does not mean refusing every helping hand. It means remaining involved in decisions about your own life. Yet there was one mistake I kept making, and it took me years to recognize it. The mistake was believing that health had to feel dramatic to count. I thought a meaningful change should produce a clear result, quickly enough for me to point at it and say, "There, that worked." Life rarely behaves that way. I would eat better for a week, walk faithfully for several days, sleep poorly one night, feel discouraged, and wonder whether any of it mattered. Then I would remember people I had known who had lived by small habits for decades. They were not chasing dramatic results. They were building a rhythm. That changed my thinking. I began looking at my meals differently. Instead of asking, "What food is supposed to be the best?" I asked, "What simple food can I enjoy regularly?" Vegetables became easier when I stopped demanding that they be exciting. I learned to roast them, put them in soup, fold greens into eggs, or serve them beside beans and fish. Fruit became dessert instead of something I felt guilty about. I especially liked apples, pears, berries, oranges, and whatever local fruit looked good. I kept portions sensible and paid attention to how I felt. I also stopped chasing fashionable diets. Over the decades, I watched one plan become popular, then another, then another. Fat was once the villain, then carbohydrates were, then some special ingredient was supposed to change everything. I learned that my body did not care what was fashionable. It needed food I could digest comfortably, meals I could afford, enough variety, and a routine I could sustain. The same was true for supplements. I became much more cautious. Natural does not automatically mean harmless, and a plant product can still affect medicines or health conditions. I learned to mention supplements to my healthcare professional instead of assuming that a bottle labeled natural was automatically safe. I also learned not to stop prescribed medicine because someone told me that food could replace it. That was one of the most important lessons of my life. If a medicine needed changing, I wanted that conversation to happen with the person responsible for my care. I could ask questions, seek another professional opinion, and discuss alternatives, but I would not gamble with my health to prove that I was independent. True independence meant understanding my choices, not rejecting help. And once I understood that, something else became possible. I could stop living as though every birthday were a warning. At 80, I began noticing that many people around me were not suffering because they lacked information. They were overwhelmed by it. Every week brought a new headline, a new food to fear, a new supplement to buy, or another reason to believe that they were aging incorrectly. I felt that pressure myself, so I simplified my life. My kitchen became quieter. I bought more ordinary ingredients and fewer products making grand promises. My mornings became predictable. I woke, drank some water, opened the curtains, moved my body gently, and prepared breakfast. Sometimes I had eggs with vegetables. Sometimes I had oats with fruit. Sometimes I ate yogurt with berries. Lunch might be soup, beans, lentils, a salad, or leftovers from dinner. I did not believe every meal had to be perfectly balanced by some complicated formula. I cared more about the pattern across days and weeks. I also started paying attention to the people who remained independent into very old age. I noticed they often had small jobs. One woman watered her neighbor's plants. A man repaired old radios. Another person cooked Sunday soup for her grandchildren. Someone else volunteered at a library. These activities looked ordinary, but they gave people a reason to get dressed and participate in the world. I began doing the same. I planted herbs. I wrote letters. I cooked for people who were having difficult weeks. I learned to use video calls so I could see family members who lived far away. I did not become healthier because I became busy. I became more engaged because I remembered that my life still had a place in other people's lives. I also learned to accept changing abilities without turning them into shame. There were years when I could walk farther. There were years when I needed more rest. There were mornings when my balance felt uncertain. I learned to make my home safer, use good lighting, keep pathways clear, wear shoes that felt secure, and ask for help when a task was beyond me. Those choices did not make me weak. They helped me stay active without pretending I was 25. That distinction became very important. I was not trying to defeat aging. I was trying to live wisely inside it. And now I want to give you the simplest part of my story, because you do not need to rebuild your entire life tomorrow morning. If you were sitting beside me at my kitchen table today, I would not hand you a 12-page plan. I would pour you something warm and ask what your mornings look like. Then I would ask what you enjoy eating, how much you move, how you sleep, who you talk to, and what health questions you have been afraid to ask. From there, I would suggest starting very small. Maybe add one vegetable to a meal you already enjoy. Maybe replace a sugary drink with water some of the time. Maybe choose a whole piece of fruit instead of a highly processed sweet snack. Maybe cook a pot of beans or lentils and use the leftovers for several meals. Maybe take a gentle walk after lunch if your healthcare professional has told you that walking is appropriate for you. Maybe call someone you have not spoken with recently. Maybe move your bedtime a little earlier and give yourself a quieter final hour. These are not prescriptions. They are possibilities. If you take medication, I would add one more possibility that I consider especially important. Bring your questions to your doctor or pharmacist. Ask what each medicine is for, how you should take it, what side effects matter, whether it interacts with your other medicines or supplements, and when your treatment should be reviewed. If something changes in your health, do not assume an old plan is automatically the right plan forever. And please do not stop or change prescribed medication on my advice or anyone else's online. I have lived long enough to know that good judgment is not about choosing between doctors and common sense. It is about using both. I also want you to remember that some people need special dietary guidance. If you have kidney disease, diabetes, heart disease, swallowing problems, food allergies, or another medical condition, a food that is perfectly reasonable for one person may not be appropriate for another. Your circumstances matter. I have learned that health is personal. What I can give you is not a guarantee. It is hope. I can tell you that at 104, I still find pleasure in a simple breakfast, a walk around my town, a conversation with someone I love, and the feeling of doing something for myself. But there is one final lesson I have not yet told you, and it is the lesson I wish I had written down at 65, because it changed the way I understood every other habit. That lesson is this: I was never trying to live forever, and I do not believe you should either. I was trying to live today with enough care that tomorrow still had room for me. When I look back at the years when I was frightened of aging, I realize how much energy I wasted asking how many good years I had left. I could not answer that question then, and I cannot answer it now. What I could answer was whether I would get out of bed, open the curtains, prepare something nourishing, move a little, rest properly, speak kindly to someone, and ask for help when I needed it. Those decisions were mine. They still are. I have watched medicine change dramatically during my lifetime. I have watched advice change too. Some old advice was replaced because we learned more. Some fashionable advice disappeared because it was never as certain as people claimed. That taught me humility. I respect medicine because I have seen it save people. I respect doctors because I have known thoughtful ones who listened carefully and admitted when they needed more information. But I also respect the person sitting in the examination room. That person deserves to understand what is happening. That person deserves to ask, why? That person deserves to say, can you explain that another way? And that person deserves to participate in decisions about their own life. I think about my younger self in Blackwood, sitting at the kitchen table and believing that aging was a road that simply narrowed until there was nowhere left to go. I wish I could sit beside her now. I would tell her, Evelyn, you are not finished. You do not need to become fearless. You only need to keep choosing wisely. So if you are watching me at 60, 70, 80, 90, or beyond, please hear this from a woman who has seen more birthdays than she ever expected. You are not required to change everything today. Choose one kind thing for your body. Choose one nourishing meal. Take one safe walk. Protect 1 hour of sleep. Call one person. Ask one health question. Then do it again tomorrow. I cannot promise you how many years those choices will give you, because nobody honestly can. But I can tell you that they can give your days more attention, more purpose, and perhaps more confidence. That is the gift I still treasure at 104. If this conversation gave you a little hope, I would be honored to have you subscribe to the channel and stay with me as we keep discovering simple, sensible ways to care for ourselves as we grow older. And remember, my dear, your story is not over simply because another birthday has arrived.